Hello and good morning, everybody. I want to welcome you all back to our Talking Tech web series. This week, we are going to be talking about demystifying the alphabet soup of security. A lot of acronyms that I know everybody navigates on a daily basis. So we wanted to really dig in and talk about what those mean, how they work in your infrastructure, what those products look like, and really how to navigate that alphabet soup, if you would, of those acronyms. uh, Today, I'm joined by Rick. He is the host of the Cyber Pros podcast. He's also a cybersecurity FSE for Avant. Rick, do you want to take a minute to introduce yourself, kind of talk about your background?
Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me on. I have an interesting background. I actually came from the military. I was a Green Beret, so go teams, and then came into technology after having a huge career in coaching volleyball with the men's national team and things like that. But have always had a passion for security, and over the last 10 years or so, really just dove into cyber. And so I'm excited to demystify this, especially because the military has acronyms all over the place. So.
Well, I think the technology industry has co-opted your military alphabet speak. So
The funniest part is that I've seen acronyms that have multiple meanings, and so you have to ask, well, what acronym are you talking about? And so they have to speak it out anyways. So half the time, you might as well just say the words.
yeah. So, with that, let's kind of talk about it. So what are we talking about here with the acronyms? I'm sure many of you on the call have heard of SOC, NOC, MSSP, EPP, EDR, MDR, XDR, SOAR, SOC, SIEM. And so, Rick, I'm sure in your field, people come to you, and I think a lot of times what we're hearing or what we see is, people think a lot of these acronyms are like a big box software. Like I go and I buy Norton antivirus and I pull it off the shelf and I install it. And I think with these acronyms, a lot of these acronyms actually symbolize a solution more than they do a product, if you would. But people think they have ZTNA because they go and they buy a ZTNA product off the shelf. How do you talk through navigating all of these kind of acronyms that you see here and really understanding what matters, what's white noise, those types of things?
I mean, I think you have to understand that acronyms are created because these words get lengthy, right? Like EDR, endpoint detection and response. But what is it? EDR could be the software, it could be a management service around it. There's all these things they have to focus on. So, from my perspective, when you're dealing with the soup of acronyms that comes with the cybersecurity space, take a step back, understand what you're trying to do, what you're trying to bring into your organization from a cybersecurity perspective, and figure out what the acronyms are later, right? If you want someone to monitor your environment, that's what you want. We can then look at the acronyms later. Well, that would be a SOC, Security Operations Center. If you need all of your logs from all of your other devices to be aggregated, well, that's easy, right? You know what you need. We can give you the acronym, right? That's a SIEM, Security Information and Events Management. So just understand what you're looking for, and also define. Once you understand the acronym, define if that's actually what you need. And I'm going to just use this as an example. IR, incident response. You'll hear the industry folks talk about little IR and big IR. Understand what the differences are, right? I mean, little IR is more of a mitigation. They're going to stop something and then tell you how to fix it, versus big IR is full remediation. So understand what you need, and then the acronyms, you can start using them like you're an old pro.
Yeah, I mean, as it relates to that, are you seeing, I think another level of confusion is that some of these acronyms tend to fall underneath other acronyms. So when we talk about SIM and SOAR and XDR or SIM and SOAR and NDR, a lot of those products would fall under like an MDR or an XDR platform. Um, Potentially IDS, IPS, APT, DLP, they can all fall underneath the firewall solution that you have in place. So I think there's some confusion around that navigation as well. We see customers double up on products and, how, what do you kind of see from that perspective in helping customers navigate these are the items that are included in that versus not included?
Yeah, I mean, we do a couple of things on that front, but the easiest path that I tell people is if you're looking at a product and they have all these different acronyms, ask them, what do they mean? Where is the crossover? You're right. When you talk about data loss prevention, could be involved with an SD-WAN networking solution. Well, there's a whole bunch of acronyms I just threw out there, right? And some people might go and buy an additional data loss prevention or DLP solution, but it might come with their SD-WAN. And so, that's where you have to understand, ask the questions. No question is stupid when it comes to cybersecurity, because a lot of times you need to understand that there's probably a way to consolidate and make things easier. The second thing we do is there was a book published in 2014 that's been updated multiple times by Sunil Yu called the Cyber Defense Matrix. This is a tool that we can utilize and we can help show others to utilize how a solution they're looking at fits in their security posture and how it might overlap with other solutions. It's a cool, easy read book. Sunil's still alive. He's still kicking. He's doing a lot of stuff with Bank of America, but so there's a gentle nod that it's worth a read. So,
Rick, I think, some of the reoccurring trends through the conversations in these Talking Tech series that we're having, and I think some of the recurring trends that we see in the industry, I think it's safe to say, like, we should probably take a step back and as technology evangelists, maybe not say things like you need an EDR or you need an MDR, but say things like, what's the business case that you're trying to solve for? What are the outcomes that you're looking for? And I think, especially in the security space, that really comes into play here. Rather than honing in on the nomenclature, what are you seeing in that kind of helping hone in on the outcomes that a customer is looking for or what they're trying to protect from, basically helping them sleep at night?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it, Chris. And the way I present it is you're not offering cybersecurity solutions or products or technology when you're looking to build a cybersecurity posture. What you're doing is you're looking to build a resilient business. And if you go into that with that mental like projection, I'm building a resilient business. Why are you building a resilient business? Because I need business continuity. Why do you need business continuity? Because for me to continue to thrive as a business, I need to make revenue, right? There's the end all be all. I need to make money. And if I can do that by keeping my business continually earning and making it resilient from the potential to stop that earning, you don't need to have a security conversation because you've just had a business one. And that's the important piece.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up, Rick. So I had a customer just a couple of weeks ago, where they were talking about security of their infrastructure and kind of unsure how to navigate that, and maybe we're kind of misguided on some navigation, and ultimately we presented some large dollar amounts to upgrade some infrastructure. And what it ultimately boiled down to, that I said to the customer, was how does this, and the customer was a brewery, I guess that's the important piece of this all. And so I said to the customer, but like, how does that bill help you sell more beer? Because ultimately that's the customer's goal. So I think we're really looking at that and saying, for our customers, how does it help you insert what the customer does here, make more product if you're a manufacturing organization. I think one of the traps of the security industry certainly does look like, it's less about how does it help your company, but more about, I hear a lot of times, well, we have to have this because our cyber insurance requires it. So, how do you kind of toe that line in terms of, we have to have it, but how does it help the business do better as a business, do more of what that business needs to do to be successful?
Yeah, real quick question. Did the brewery give you a keg for free for helping them?
I did get 2 6-packs, not a keg, but
Yeah, that works. That works. So, I think a lot of people are focused on insurance requirements or regulatory requirements, and those are important, right? But you shouldn't let those drive how you ultimately are going to do business. Yeah, I understand that if it's a government regulation, then you have to meet those requirements, but there are ways to do it without overspending. There are ways to do it with a third party managed service. I think that's what a lot of people forget. They don't have to build it internally. There's companies out there who have done this for decades. Scary to think that we've had cyber that long. And those companies have the staff, have the process, and then they bring the technology as the cherry on top. So for me, I really do try to drive folks into your responsibility is growing your business. Let someone else protect your business so you can continue to do that.
Ricky said about it's funny that we had cyber for that long. Like ransomware's been around since we were pinning floppy disks to bulletin boards. So it's been a problem since the day that computers were invented. It's just been reimagined many times over. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think, let's kind of get into some of that navigation. And, a lot of the questions I get as an Avail employee with many of the customers is, understanding EDR and MDR. And so we'll throw some names out here. So, like SentinelOne and their kind of managed platform, or Carbon Black, or CloudStrike and Falcon Complete, and things like that. So understanding, you know, a lot of these are all based around detection and response. Um, but they're definitely not all created equally. So can you talk a little bit about kind of maybe you see third-party organizations, so somebody like maybe Blue Voyant or eCentire, or 40, or somebody like that who is providing MDR or EDR, as well as then these other vendors where I see the trap. Customer will say things like, "Well, I already get CrowdStrike. Why not take their MDR?" And maybe let's talk through that, because I don't know that I've always seen that being the best decision, because of the limitations. But kind of, you want to talk through that a little bit?
Yeah, and I think it really comes down to understanding your edges, right? Most people look at it and go, well, all of my edges involve some form of user. And then I take it one step further and talk about, well, you have network, you have device, and you have cloud. And so of the DRs you see on this list, right, network detection and response, NDR was really kind of the first one. It was correlating with your firewall, it was looking at your network traffic, and it was a sensor in your system, which has now become commonplace with most managed services. But originally, it was just a product. It was a piece of hardware with a bunch of software that was running anomalous detection on your network traffic, typically with a NetFlow or a Brozeek. Now that's getting in the weeds a little bit, but that's where it started. And people were like, oh man, we can do a lot of really cool machine learning and artificial intelligence anomalous behavior detection. Why don't we extend that to the endpoint? Well, that's where endpoint detection response came from. And that's where the companies like Carbon Black and CrowdStrike and SentinelOne have thrived in the industry. But like I tell people, their focus has always been and still is on creating a phenomenal software product, an agent for your endpoints. They're smart though. They realized that they could create a managed service around it. So ultimately, what they're providing you is a managed EDR, even though most of those companies say, well, now we're going to give you an MDR, managed detection and response. But if you ask the big five, if you ask Gartner, if you ask most of us in the industry, managed detection and response really has to have three key components. One, it has to be managed, right? 24/7. So somebody has to be looking at all of the logs. Two, it has to be able to look at your network traffic. Uh, and that includes your endpoint traffic. So it's got to be able to take all of the logs that are security focused and look at them, which means that it has to have a SIEM, right? And so there that's the biggest changeover. And as you kind of look through these slides, right, NDR kind of moved towards, EDR, towards XDR, and then MDR. Now, managed detection and response can manage any of these products. Now you're seeing the XDR come out as the next big hype, but X stands for extended detection and response. It was meant to be just like an endpoint detection and response tool. It was meant to be a software. It was meant to be a solution for you to take all of your security purchases, bring all of that data into one pane of glass. So very similar to a security incident and events manager. But the difference was now you could use that single pane of glass and actually respond and interact through API integrations to those other tools, like the endpoint detection response tool, like the network detection response tool. And so the problem is marketing has stepped in. We all love marketing. They're good at what they do. I appreciate them, but we have just muddied the water, right? XDR is really a way for us to be able to utilize all the tools from a single enter button. Managed detection and response is really about aggregating all of the logs and then having some form of behavior detection and response to it. Endpoint detection and response is about the devices, network is about the network. And now we're starting to see cloud MDR. That's the next big one that I've seen. And so they're thinking about calling it CMDR. Hopefully they don't. But that's a way for you to protect your cloud environment, typically through security brokers and workload protection. So it muddies it like crazy. What I really want people to take away is identify what edges you're trying to protect. Is it your cloud? Is it your network? Is it your endpoints? And understand that in all of those, it's always your users that are going to be the problem. So,
yeah, I mean, I think the conversations that I've had lately around security have been definitely in the area of XDR, just because you see organizations trying to do as much as they can with as small of a team as possible. Um, and, admittedly, the security industry as a whole has really, kind of go back to what we initially talked about, has really focused on all these like little point products here and there. Buy this and you'll make yourself more secure. Buy that and you'll make yourself more secure. And so what we see is 10 security products at a customer, and now they're being told, well, you're super secure because you have all 10 of these. And it's like, well, how do I handle the alert fatigue from all of these? How do I see all this information? Better yet, how do I correlate when an attack comes through as it moves through my infrastructure? How do I see it through all these applications? And so that's really where I think XDR, while we've talked about the fact that marketing has got a hold of it and really made it what it is. It's really been kind of a key component, especially from my past of coming from an MSP. That's something that we really focused on, was all of those applications writing to a singular interface that we could watch and monitor, to watch how threats move through the infrastructure, to watch, down to, here is the email from the anti-spam provider that came through with the malicious payload, and then how it hit the endpoint, where it crawled the network, where it touched the server. I think really that's going to be key. And admittedly, the cyber insurance providers love that. They want to see all of that information and really understand what data was accessed, what data was enumerated, what was touched. For some of the people on the call, this really would allow organizations to maybe not have to report a security incident, because potentially they can prove, well, no data was actually touched during this threat.
I love it. Yeah, and I think you're right on. The idea of being able to take and look at the whole of the event instead of logging into all of your different security solutions in a single pane and then being able to pull that report down, you're going to feel very confident. Hey, we stopped it in time. Nothing was breached. And the amount of time you're going to need to take to remediate is going to be decreased aggressively, which will help you with your cyber insurance provider. It will help you with any of your regulatory concerns, but more than that, it's going to help you sleep at night because it was easy. And so I do like the idea that XDR is making things just that much more connected.
So, one of the things that you mentioned was that management, and talking about, SOC or network monitoring. I see a lot of customers that feel like they've been thrust into the limelight of needing to be a security expert. I mean, I think you and I can agree it's a pretty specialized field. You what are you seeing in terms of? I have a lot of customers that just think they need to be the security expert, and I very much all the time discuss items around, that is certainly a team that you don't need to build. That this can be a managed model, where it's a phone call for a security incident. I see teams of, two, three, four people, from a infrastructure side at a customer, and they think they need to be available 24/7 for a security incident. So what are you seeing from that perspective with SOC and managed infrastructure, managed operations, managed security operations?
Yeah, I think a lot of companies are finally realizing that while their office is open 8 to 5, their data is open 24/7, and so they're starting to realize that they can't run their own security operations. At a minimum, it would take 6 to 9 people, and that's without breaks and managers and growth and all the other stuff. Most SOCs run with 20, 30, 50, 100, 500 people. And so then you have to leverage, okay, am I going to be able to get the best security talent? Maybe not. You might get some up and coming hungry folks that want to really be a part of the industry, but the really good talent is going to the really good security service providers because they know they're going to get the education they want. They're going to continue to grow. That's who you need to outsource it to. That's who the managed service provider is there for, is for the customer who just wants that force multiplication, right? That is the key. Multiply the economy of scale of what you need done through a company that's going to charge you far less than hiring a staff member because they have the ability to scale that to fit their multi-tenant environment.
Yeah, and I mean, certainly those teams can, a lot of them, as we will hear statements like "follow the sun." So they've got people working 24/7. They've got eyes on glass. Again, another industry term that people like to use. But they certainly are monitoring those XDR solutions 24/7 and have somebody there that's constantly reviewing that. And they're, I know the big hot button. Let's just not one of these acronyms today, but let's just throw it out there. AI. Specifically, there's a logo on this that's really shown that there's a lot that can be done with AI. Microsoft Sentinel is really doubling down on that LLM and utilizing simple language queries to really understand your security environment. I think last year they demoed the tool. It's not at 100% in prime time yet, but talk about that. How do you see AI changing some of these security items?
Yeah, I made a joke the other day to a customer who said, "Well, I don't know that I want a third-party managed service running my security." And I said, "Well, you could probably just use ChatGPT, type in what you need, it'll give you an answer." But and he kind of laughed. We kind of joked around about it, but it's not far off, right? And the idea of these large language models, these generative AI solutions, is that it's able to learn faster than the original machine learning models that we were using for unsupervised. The problem is it's still learning and it's going to make mistakes. So while it's going to give you more automation, it's also going to cause some alerts that either are going to be missed or are going to be false positives. And so you're never not going to need a human. And I think that's the component you need to worry about. I'm going to take one final piece on this. AI is going to change the way the humans interact with the technology because of the process AI is bringing to the table. If the process is leaner and faster and better, then the humans are going to be better at responding to whatever incidents the AI is actually alerting on.
Yeah, and how are you seeing? I mean, I know Microsoft showed off that really slick integration with their AI where a security analyst was typing pretty normal questions into Microsoft Sentinel and getting answers out about querying the environment. So can saying things like, can you tell me when we saw this anomalous data first start on XYZ server? So it's utilizing the information that's within your own infrastructure to really query and I guess make ease of filtering through all those logs.
Yeah, I mean, that at its core is probably the best way to use it. Now, the one caveat is making sure that when you ask it that question, it's tapping into one, the right data, because good data in, good data out, right? But two, that it's tapping into not just the right data, the good data, but also it's doing it in an encrypted way. It's doing it in a protected, secure manner. So that way, it's not just grabbing in junk. But I will tell you that I've seen some really cool queries come up where within seconds, you're able to identify the lateral movement because Microsoft's AI solution or any of the other LLMs that are out there are able to say, oh, you want to know this? It went to all these. And you're like, well, there's my map. I need to go block all of those endpoints.
Yeah. So you talked about taking action at the endpoint, and that's great. I mean, that allows us to kind of hop back and talk about the endpoints and how the EDR and MDR are certainly not a created equal product. What are you seeing when customers are looking at a handful of different solutions and maybe they're looking at, I see customers all the time weigh somebody like a eCentire against maybe Falcon Complete, and how do you help them navigate that and understand that while they both may use the words managed detection and response, it isn't exactly the same. One of them is more isolated than the other.
Yeah, I think I look at their overall maturity level first. I talk to the company about where their security maturity level is. If you're at a middle of the road level, call it a 2 or a 3, then you're probably looking at the next level, which is going to be a true managed detection response, right? It's going to be, we have tons of sites, we have tons of firewalls, we have tons of routers, we have tons of endpoints, we have cloud access, and I need all of that brought together so I can see, correlate, and do everything through that security incident process. But if they're not that mature, the fastest way in to supporting a good security posture is the endpoint detection response tool, because most often, over 85% of the time, you're being attacked from a phishing or a social engineering standpoint, and it's going to happen at the endpoint because of the user. And so understand that a managed endpoint detection response solution is managing the technology that's provided by the EDR, but the MDR is going to bring in that XDR component. It's going to bring in that automation through the SOAR platform. That 24/7 SOC monitoring is on both, but a good MDR will also show you your patch management needs through vulnerability scanning. It'll give you network visibility. It'll actually look at your network traffic analysis, and it can also look at your endpoint logs. And so it's really I would say it's, you've gone up and bought the semi versus just buying the truck that's going to haul a trailer, right? And it's allowing you to add more things to your stack. But a lot of customers don't necessarily need an MDR anymore, right? They need a managed endpoint detection and response because they've gone remote. And along with that, they need a cloud firewall to allow for a zero trust network access or VPN. And so it's really about understanding their architecture.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think those are continued conversations that we're having. In the security space, years ago, we would use like what a castle and moat defense, as they would say. So as part of that, we're seeing the moat get moved further and further out. We're not, where's the infrastructure? Where's the castle that we're protecting? Well, the castle's in Azure, but the castle's also in AWS, and the castle's also in a home office somewhere, and the castle is also at a WeWork that we rent because we want to have conference room space. So,
right.
I think really we're looking at that more. I see MDR more of like that onion conversation that we have with security, the layers of security. So it's, you know, hey, we want the anti-spam filter because we want to protect it and maybe not have that piece of spam come in that has the mal link or the malware attached to it. But hey, we want to block that link with some sort of DNS filtering if we can't get it and it comes through. And oh, by the way, if it's too new of a link and we miss it with the DNS, we want to hit it with the EDR on the endpoints and we want to see the network monitoring. So I think really understanding all the applications from a security perspective that you're putting into your environment, that's the biggest conversation. You know, how do they all talk with each other? How do they all interact with each other? I think for a very long time, we've been buying these security products that are kind of all each out on their island. I mean, you know, but I'll mention a name here. So a vendor, Coro, they've kind of built their whole marketing space around like, hey, we have all these applications that you're using today, but they all integrate and talk to each other, and they're all in a singular interface. There's a lot of power and a lot of ease of use in that. But there's also a lot of safety around being able to see all of that in a single spot.
Yeah, I mean, you think about it, right? Like you said it earlier, single pane of glass, although I don't think my monitor is glass anymore, right? So single pane of plastic, whatever it looks like, is probably more integral to anything because it's going to be about fast. Really cool stat for the listeners is in 2014, it was almost 260 days of a bad actor just sitting in your environment trying to figure out how he was going to harass you. And now it's less than 3 hours. In 2023, it was less than 3 hours. They could get in, they could identify what they needed to do, and they could drop whatever they were going to drop, ransomware payloads and things like that. So you don't have the time to go hunt for them and kick them out anymore. You have to be able to see everything quickly.
Yeah, yeah, I agreed. The dwell time has extended dramatically. So let's kind of, I mean, you know, we talked about these, and there's some other acronyms here that we'll be going more in depth with in the following weeks, or I guess I should say in the following months. But you know, you talked about ZTNA, and I know there's a kind of all of these a lot of these acronyms have been kind of bundled, but when we talk about VPN, SDP, ZTNA, SSE, they're all kind of falling under that SASE mentality. Do you want to talk about a little bit more of that? And again, it comes down to single pane of glass as
Yeah.
SASE likes to promote.
And I think SASE was originally created to combine your kind of your network, right, around specifically around SD-WAN, right, software-defined networks, and your security all combined and mushed together. But it really came out as a single vendor play. Is there a single vendor like a Cato or Apollo or a Fortinet who could come out and do it all? And that was where Gartner really drove home the idea of SASE. But now we're starting to see all these other acronyms break apart, partly because of remote workers, because of COVID. That started the VPN conversation, the virtual private network. I need to be able to access data encrypted through a tunnel. Well, what if we could do that, but then do the trust but verify that comes with zero trust? Well, now the VPN is upgraded to ZTNA, right? Zero trust network access. And now we're starting to see people say, well, I've already purchased a managed network or an SD-WAN solution. I don't want to change my provider, but they don't offer the security component. So a lot of those SASE providers have said, oh, we can offer the security side, which is now SSE, Security Service Edge, and overlay it to what you're already doing, thus allowing people who have already spent money on something that they're comfortable with to be more secure. And so I think that's where we're starting to see these layers flow in, which is good, which is really good.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, we talk about IR and indicators of compromise and you know some of these threats. What are you seeing from the space of these managed organizations that are performing IR and helping to mitigate, you know, these threats and reviewing your indicators of compromise, somebody like maybe a Blue Voyant or an eCentire?
Yeah, I think a lot of people know about incident response because if they had an incident, they know they have to respond to it. But I think people forget that there's a lot of things that we could be doing proactively, right? And a lot of these companies like eCentire, like Blue Voyant, the other MSSPs are doing that. They're looking at indicators of compromise before they're compromised. Honestly, a lot of them call them indicators of concern. If they can find them when they're just a concern, that's a much better term than compromise, right? And they're looking at those advanced persistence threats or those APTs that have been mapped, typically using a MITRE framework, that have been identified as threats that people are utilizing to get into your network. And they're finding a way to take that threat intelligence and make your security solutions that much more proactive or quicker to respond. So less reactive time. It's faster. So I think when we talk about some of those solutions, people are moving things what's called left of boom, right? The boom is the incident. And if they can do that, we're starting to see cost reductions, which is really cool.
Yeah, and I mean, you talked about that MITRE attack framework again. Certainly, I think organizations that are on the call today really, that is a great place to start. I don't, not sure if everybody's familiar with the MITRE attack framework. Rick, maybe you want to go into a little bit more detail on how organizations are utilizing that to align themselves from a security perspective.
Yeah, so a lot of customers can utilize it just straight from MITRE. It's, MITRE is a solutioning company that actually takes and looks at all of these different threats that happen. And they go, okay, this threat is root cause is X, right? And this is how it could be solved. This is how it's getting in. And they break it down into all of these different threat landscapes. Find a provider that utilizes that MITRE attack framework, and it's ATT, and then it's the ampersand CK is tack, so they get a little crazy with that, right? But it's really trying to drive home the fact that if you have a provider that utilizes that, they're able to see those advanced persistent threats, those threat vectors, those ransomware attacks, all those different things. They're able to see those through a behavioral lens, not through a reactive, hey, this just happened and we don't know why. And so I think MITRE is doing some great work out there. They have the attack framework for those that are looking to protect against that. They also have a defend framework for those that are looking to do more of the blue team side of the house.
And we talked about ZTNA and how it's not just like a product that you can go pull off the shelf. Do you want to talk a little bit about like a zero trust network journey and kind of those plot points along the way?
Yeah, I think people sometimes confuse the zero trust compliance framework with ZTNA, which is truly a point product, which can be managed, but the journey of zero trust is arduous, it's long, but it's really meant to be a continual improvement journey, one that you're always looking to trust but verify, right? Someone gets into your network, every time they touch a new piece of data, you're going to verify that that person has privileged access, that the identity matches, that they're coming in from a secure port. All of those things happen. What happened with the zero trust framework is it got very aggressive, right? It got very deep as to how you have to go. And so people said, well, how can we get some of that with where we're at today? And that's where ZTNA, Zero Trust Network Access, came from. They said, well, we can enforce this through an upgraded version of a VPN. And I'm not trying to downplay what ZTNA can do, but it is probably the first step towards the journey of having a true zero trust framework.
And Rick, do you at all talk with people about the zero trust roadmap? It's zerotrustroadmap.org. Great place to start for anybody on the call. I'm going to put that in the chat if you guys would like to look at that. It's a great place to start to understand really how that architecture looks and how its steps or phases on a plot point graph rather than a singular product. But this is a great resource for understanding where you're at in the ZTNA journey and how you may want to continue to improve that.
Yeah, and I love the Zero Trust Roadmap. I also think that CISA, CISA, it's our government agency on cybersecurity, has done a really good job of kind of building out a zero trust maturity model that people can start to align to. So there's a couple of options out there that people can really kind of drive home and understand where they need to go.
Yeah, and I know one of the acronyms that actually isn't on this document, but I'd love to kind of talk about this a little bit more because as part of our conversations today, I feel like we're kind of starting that level with a customer. But let's talk about like vCISO services, understanding those. I think, again, customers are really looking for where in their journey they are with security and kind of just feeling overwhelmed. And so really looking for those security services.
Yeah, vCISO, Virtual Chief Information Security Officer. We're seeing a lot of companies, they'll have a chief information officer, a chief technology officer, CIO, CTO, or even just, a VP or director of IT that are really focused on their architecture and infrastructure, maybe the data flows and the way their users can utilize and access those datas. But the chief information security officer can really provide that roadmap of where the posture should be that doesn't interfere with that business continuity. So resilient building. But to hire that person, right? Do you have the dollars to hire another C-suite executive who can actually implement at that level, who's good at talking to the board? It's tough. So the virtual CISO is really more of a fractional service where they come on board with, call it 6 to 10 customers, and they work for you, 8 hours a week or, 10 hours a month or something like that. And they really help drive what you're doing. And they're that high level kind of consultant that will help you guys identify budgets, identify postures, identify all those great things. The biggest thing with the vCISO that's started to come to fruition is people love the idea of the fraction. They can afford this. But there's a lot of folks that have stepped back and said, since the SolarWinds breach, how liable am I as a chief information security officer? And how much liability do I want to accept? And so we're starting to see this kind of back and forth there, and it's interesting.
Yeah, and one of the other items that, again, I know we haven't really talked about, and maybe doesn't necessarily get defined as one of these acronyms, but certainly a service offering that I see a lot of customers looking at just because of the nature of the security. So we buy all these products, we test them, they're in place, great. But it's really, that security portion is twofold. It's the processes around it. So, what are you seeing from tabletop exercises and organizations that are actually coming in and helping the customer not develop the security practice, not the solutions, not the software that's in place, but really the process, the procedure, the people part?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that a vCISO or anybody you want to hire at the outset for a consultant thing should offer is an incident response plan. Maybe a business continuity plan, that's an aggressive beast, but an incident response plan, and then the tabletops. It's basically, your chance to nerd out, but also see how your business would respond in a controlled setting if you were attacked, if you had an incident hit you. And if you have an incident response plan and you've practiced it, we're seeing that 70 to 80% of customers who have those two things, it's a response plan, and have practiced it through a tabletop with professionals running it, can get back from an incident in less than 10 days, which oftentimes is the magic number for your insurance carriers to pay you for a reimbursement.
And so, Rick, I know you probably don't have the stats on this, but out of the customers that you interact with, how many of them do you think, while they have all these security products in place and they look great from that perspective and they're doing what they're supposed to do from the solution side, how many of them do you think have had to make a declaration have tested what their process is when the building is proverbially on fire, when the data is being encrypted. I think the industry has seen a lot of get the right products in place, and we don't need to worry about this because we're protected by the products. We all know. I mean, look at it. What was it a year ago? Palo Alto's own EDR solution was sending out malware because it was
Yep.
compromised. I mean, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So those response plans really are important. What do you see that split look like? Do you see people really doing that? And do you see a bigger push towards that?
I think it depends on the size of the company, but ultimately, the number for me is it's less than 50% have a defined incident response plan. And that's a big number, right? Less than half. Those that do have one typically have it in their data center or in their cloud, and they cannot access it during a ransomware attack. And so I'm not saying you should print it off necessarily, but you have to have it somewhere where you can access it, where everybody can access it, that is going to not be encrypted during a ransomware attack. And so, less than 50% have an incident response plan or have even tested their incident response plan. And then I would say, most of them do not have it in a place that's actually protected from the rest of their network. So it's kind of useless then, especially if you don't practice it. So
yeah, I mean, the other thing to highlight, I think that I see a lot is customers may tell me that they have a DR run book, which isn't necessarily a response plan. I'm like, that is but one portion of your response plan. That's how you're going to respond to the recovery aspect. That doesn't talk about how you're going to respond to the PR of the fact that you've been breached. Understanding what data has been touched, so that you know that you have to have a conversation with your customers about what data has been touched or what data has been taken. And especially, I've seen some people take the stance of we'll just pay the ransom if it's a ransomware attack, but with a lot of the double extortion attacks that occur, I don't know that that's the safest methodology, because your data is probably going to be out there even if you pay the ransom at this point.
yeah, and I think the one thing you hit on is all those other factors, not just the actual incident response. A lot of people don't realize that unless they have some third-party breach team or crisis response team that includes an attorney, everything they do is likely going to be required to be shared with insurance, with government agencies, with you name it. And so one thing that I always promote is, even if it's just paying somebody $1 to have them on retainer, have a third-party breach attorney, because then as you get breached, as you go through your response plan, you work with that attorney, and he or she can disseminate the information. And it's important because by doing that, you have prepared yourself for potential litigation, which gives you the ability to have privilege with your attorney. And if you have privilege with your attorney, certain things don't have to be shared. And I think that's the one thing that most people miss when they build, even if they have the PR, they have the brand loyalty, they have the communications components in their IRP.
And having that third party attorney, I think, is important. I've had customers talk to me about the fact that we have cyber liability insurance. We'll utilize the cyber company or the insurance company to take care of that. But I think, Rick, you and I have both probably seen, and any customer that's lived through one of those events has seen, that the insurance company is not there to protect the customer when it comes time to work through all of this. I think they tend to be there to protect the payout of their assets.
Yeah, for sure. That's exactly right.
Definitely. So, I mean, with all of this really does circle back to something that you and I have talked about before, which is following those core tenets of cybersecurity. Do you want to talk a little bit more in depth about how that all kind of really covers everything we talked about here today, to put a nice little bow on the package as we get to almost the 5-minute mark?
Yeah, I love it. I think, you and I talked about this before, but we really talked about continuity, right? Resilience. And so to have that, you need to understand what's happening in your environment. So that's visibility. That's not a security conversation, right? That is a business conversation. You need to know what's happening 24/7. that again isn't necessarily a security conversation. That's a continuity conversation. Is my internet working, right? At the lowest of levels, all day, every day. And then the people, process, technology. Technology is last there for a reason, right? The technology is the tool. It's the solution that's going to help make things easier, but without the right people to set up the best process, 45 technologies, you're just going to have a burnout of alerts, right? You may only need 15 technologies if you have the right process. Holistic, I always talk about holistic because if you're looking at purchasing a product and it doesn't actually help you across as many places as possible in your posture, if it doesn't make it easy for your people to use, if it puts an impediment up on your sales team, then you're preventing your revenue growth. And so when you look at purchasing a product, when you look at purchasing a service or a solution, look at the holistic of how it's going to affect you. And defense in depth is where you have to get nerdy, right? It's where you have to get a little deep, right? Because you have to understand, hey, these solutions are going to help me at all of these different layers. Where am I missing? And if you don't know those layers, then you can't go defense in depth.
Certainly. Well, I'm just going to take a minute here to open it up to everybody on the call. Any questions that anybody might have today for Rick or myself? Certainly want to make sure if you have any outstanding questions that we maybe try to hit those as it relates to really anything security based at this point. Just hang on a second here and see if we have any questions that come in, but it doesn't look like it. Rick, thanks so much today for joining our call and being a wealth of information and helping our customers navigate the alphabet soup of
Love it. Thanks,
security
Chris.
acronyms.
Yeah, thanks, Chris, for having me. This was awesome.
Yep. And thank you, everybody, for joining the call today. Look forward to next week, where we're going to have some industry panel organizations that handle some of these products. So things like XDR, MDR, EDR. And so we'll get their take on the same things we talked about as part of this call today. It'll be a really nice overlay onto the conversations that Rick and I had today. Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody, for your time.